Welcome to the third edition of the Paris Peace Forum. Bienvenue à la troisième édition du Forum de Paris sur la paix. Mon nom est Justin Weiss. My name is Justin Weiss. I'm the founder and director general of the Paris Peace Forum, and I will have the pleasure to accompany you during these 3 days, along with Trisha Shetty, who is the president of the steering committee of the Paris Peace Forum. Hi, Trisha.
Hi, Justin. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Welcome to the more than 10,000 people who have registered on our platform. Welcome also to our followers on YouTube and Facebook, since this is broadcast to the outside world. Be sure to follow the conversation on Twitter and elsewhere with the hashtag Paris Peace Forum 2020, where you will get some additional news and information. The second wave of COVID-19 is hitting Europe hard. And just before we started this introduction, we were wearing masks, we were keeping distances. I'm keeping more than a meter away from Trisha. We were applying strict regulations, but still, we had to move entirely digital, unfortunately, and this had a big impact on our event.
Yes, this has been a testing period of resilience for the entire global community, and we did have to change the format of Paris Peace Forum as well as reset our priorities for this year. And although the forum is going to be entirely digital, we have tried to replicate what it would be like if you were here with us in person. So the forum involves you, the audience, being active participants within the platform and being engaged over the 3 days of the forum. As for the content, we have had to truly take a pause and ask ourselves and the Paris Peace Forum family questions of what are the solutions we are going to be proposing to address this crisis, and how do we get out of this crisis to build a more sustainable world. For us at Paris Peace Forum, this didn't really feel like much of an alien thought, because when we did the inception over the first year, it was stressing on the recognition that the problems that we're facing are global in nature, and that talks of borders and nationalism won't get us very far. We have to double down on multilateralism and a multi-stakeholder approach, which is what we have been doing.
Absolutely, and we decided for this edition, centered on solutions to the COVID-19 multifaceted crisis, that we would focus on 3 priorities. The first one, of course, starts with health. It's the global governance of health. We've not been doing great on that front, I mean, as a humanity, as an international community. And so we need to fix this. We need also to make sure that the tools to fight COVID-19, especially vaccines, are available to all, and that will be a big priority for us. The second priority is the economy, because of course health is a big issue, but the tsunami of recession and economic problems that has been hitting the planet, of course, is of great concern. We will have in particular the Summit for Development Banks, called Finance in Common, tomorrow, with the idea of relaunching, restarting the economy, and doing it in a way that is more respectful of the environment and the question of social inclusion. The third priority is the digital world. You know, obviously, many of our lives have just moved online since we started the lockdowns and everything. And indeed, this very edition of the Paris Peace Forum has moved entirely online. The problem being that all the problems in the digital world have followed us home, whether it's cyber attacks or infodemic and fake news, including on the pandemic, the protection of private data, etc. This will constitute the third priority for this year. You will be able to follow all the sessions. You will be able to not only follow the sessions, but also make comments, ask questions, communicate with the moderators, etc. Once again, as Trisha was saying, we try to replicate what would be the actual experience. And for that, we have an incredible lineup of speakers, hundreds of speakers who will push forward these projects and initiatives, and we'll have these great debates.
Yes, and as promising and exciting as the panels and sessions will be, we want you to remember the heartbeat of the forum forum are our projects. So we have 100 projects that will be showcased across the 3 days of the forum. We had 850 plus applications sent in from around the world, and we had the tough decision to narrow it down to 100 projects, out of which 75 in some way or the other are in response to the COVID crisis. Most of the projects represent civil society organizations as well as NGOs. So we encourage you to identify what areas of topic interest you, track these project leaders down, reach out to them, set their pitches on your personal agenda, and we hope you enjoy getting to know the projects as much as we have having them be part of a platform.
Yes. To be honest, I had the privilege of getting into the platform a bit earlier, as early as yesterday, and I was able not only to discover the 100 projects, some of them are really breathtaking, I would say, and also to start networking with others. I've sent messages not to the 10,000 of you, but to many among you. This is working really well, and of course what we want to do is emulate the casual encounters that you would have done if you had been present in Paris like last year or the year before, encountering people, having a sort of serendipity in all of this. This is discovering beyond your own realm what you can do.
And before you get the last word in, do not forget that you can also network amongst each other within the platform and use the hashtag Paris Peace Forum to continue the dialogue across Twitter, YouTube, and all the other platforms.
Now, to officially open the third edition of the Paris Peace Forum, let me introduce our president, the president of the Paris Peace Forum Association, Pascal Lamy, who will now take the floor.
Merci, Justin. Merci, Trisha.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Trisha.
Vous nous avez expliqué, au fond, que cette édition, la troisième du Forum de Paris
Explained
sur la
that
paix,
this third Paris Peace Forum is an exceptional one.
c'est la première fois que nous sommes projetés à ce point.
This is the first time that we've been forced or thrown into the digital world.
D'un certain point de vue,
From one point of view, it's
physique,
sad that we no longer have the physical contact and all the activity that you get behind the scenes and next to the coffee machines. But at the same time, it's good to have had such a swift response to adjust to the circumstances. And I would like to applaud all the teams that have done such wonderful work. And you'll see over the course of these days that we have a Paris Peace Forum which is very enthusiastic, has plenty of ideas, plenty of plans and projects, and we'll see plenty of new things.
je suis heureux de ce point de vue-là.
So
Vous accueillir aujourd'hui,
in that context, I'm very pleased. And here today, I'm very pleased to welcome, but not by myself, to extend this welcome.
dès les débuts,
We're pleased to welcome you with the partners who have been with us since the very beginning. As part of this Paris Peace Forum, it's Paris, so we obviously have the mayor of Paris who wanted to be with us, who is hosting this. And last year, when we had the Paris Peace Forum with physical presence, we had also presence from the United Nations, and we have the Secretary General of the United Nations, and who will be with us tomorrow, and we have the President who will be at the Élysée Palace and will be with us tomorrow. And today we have Anne Hidalgo. We used to be on very familiar terms with the familiar you and calling one another by our first names. I don't know what to do today, but I shall say Madam Mayor. We're going to have a dialogue here talking about cities and the different international issues we have to contend with. So, dear Anne, the floor is yours. Thank you, dear President, and thank you, dear Pascal. We call one another by our first names. We're on familiar terms, so I suggest we keep going like that because it's more authentic given the relationship that we have. I'm delighted to be here again hosting the Paris Peace Forum, and I'd like to thank you and all your teams for doing what you have done to make this organization possible. As you've said, we're not physically present. We can't have our chats and discussions when we're together. And we know that with human contact and in international meetings, it is important to see one another, to be physically present. But here we can see that there's real ambition and belief of men and women around the planet who want to produce and present new ideas, not just in theory. We want to see it in real context, in real local policies. And so we are here together for that, and I'm sure that this digital forum will be able to do that. I would like to say thank you. Thank you for being here in Paris. Paris is a symbolic city. This is where we have had so many historic declarations on human rights. And the last two I could cite, there was the United Nations and the 1948, that was the 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, but there's also the Paris Climate Accord, and we'll be celebrating the 5th anniversary of that in December. So Paris is the city which is associated with these universal declarations. So thank you, Pascal Lamy. Thank you, dear President, for being here together with us in Paris. And I will always be there with you personally and with your entire team, with all these men and women who are working for the good cause around the world. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, dear Anne. We shall now go straight into the subject of the forum. We know that this year was marked by a major disaster, which is the pandemic, and alas, many countries around the world are still in the grips of it, even though some may see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Last weekend, we saw a glimpse of blue sky, looking at these fairly dark and gloomy prospects in this part of the world. But here, the first question which I would like to ask you is that we've often been told that this pandemic means we're going back to sovereign states, that it's a threat to our different peoples, wherever they are. We need to protect our people, and therefore it is the national state which comes forward and plays a prominent role. As we all know, the Paris Peace Forum is based on a different idea. It's based on the idea of international relations, international life, and international cooperation, and that it should not just be a matter of decisions by nation states, even though obviously nation states have their importance, but there are other players involved. You have NGOs, you have the private sector, local authorities, cities, and major institutions. So, dear Anne, when we look at the priorities that we have, when we look at the emergency situation we have at the moment having to deal with the virus, what is your experience and what is happening with the city of Paris, and what have you seen in the other cities that you network with? What have they said about the way of managing the pandemic, which could help us open up prospects for the future? Thank you for the question. I think this is a moment for citizens to respond in the face of a pandemic. Obviously, public authorities, you could say that you have the final ones with national authorities, local authorities, and major state organizations, and you have international organizations too, which play a key role in coordinating action and providing information and conducting research so that we can deal with the virus. And our societies have to learn to live with the virus while we work on new drugs and vaccines. But we also need to have citizens on side. What we have heard from this experience over the months of the pandemic and living in lockdown is that we've got closer relationships with the major cities around the world. We have had discussions on best practices. We've looked at the different situations. Obviously, they have different institutional approaches. There are some countries that are more decentralized than others, but France is a very centralized country. But what we have noted in the discussions that we've had with mayors around the world on every continent is that we need to get all the different levels working together to take public action. We obviously need it at an international level. We need to have multilateral approach and international organizations that are truly involved and are credible and legitimate and are working on this. And I'm thinking, for example, of the World Health Organization and matters related to research and sharing information around the world, so that together we can deal with this pandemic with all the tools available to us. We need to have public authorities, we need to have national authorities, state authorities, which are strong, providing protection. In Paris, we're in France and therefore in Europe, so we need to have that intermediary level that we have with the European Union, but we need to have strong public authorities which work together, sharing information with citizens and with different organizations, such as NGOs and local authorities. And the point where all of this converges is there in practice out in the field. It's not a question of just theory. We have to be there out in the field, out in the ground where we're dealing with people. And there where you find most people, that's in cities. There's high population density. You have people living very, very closely together. You've got all sorts of people coming together. You have vulnerable people in our cities, and cities need to look at those who are in more prosperous situations and those who are more vulnerable. So it's a good level. None of the different decision-making or power levels can work if we don't have that contact with citizens. And the important point which I've shared with our different colleagues, with different mayors in cities, that is to be able to combat the pandemic, to combat the virus, which of course has had such a major economic impact and social impact. And we can see the way the pandemic is spreading, that it's the most vulnerable people who are the hardest hit. We need to look after all these different levels of population. And we've seen this in some of the big cities with other epidemics. We had, for example, the experience dealing with AIDS. It's not the same type of epidemic, of course, but the experience that we acquired in cities dealing with the AIDS pandemic was based on experiences in San Francisco, New York, and London, and we were able to implement an approach which was relevant to all the different categories of people concerned. Speaking in the right terms, using the right tools of communication so that we had targeted communication, because you need to have this work done at a very local level, dealing with the most vulnerable people and, of course, dealing with the entire population, so that prevention and all the different acts of hygiene that we need to have, everything that we can do to restrict the virus and stop it spreading, can be done. So we need to share information, and we need to see people not just as children who have to be told what they should do at every minute of the day, but as people who are responsible, and as responsible people are able to understand what's happening. They have to be given the information so that they know what is happening and given the right type of information. So what I have noted with my colleagues who are mayors and with the team here in Paris, and we have regular discussions with authorities for the national government and with health authorities in France and in Paris, what we have realized is that we have to make sure that people become true citizens with the right information and are truly involved in the entire process, so that they become players in fighting against the pandemic. So this means a very decentralized approach, a very shared approach, so that we can restore confidence and trust, which is one of the main issues that we have to deal with. And we have to do that to eliminate fake news and inaccurate ideas which are being spread around, and knowledge which is inaccurate. And we have to do that for the pandemic. So you can see that it's work that has to be done at every level. And we can see that everything is interdependent, but we have to make sure that citizens are not treated as children. They have to be players in their own right as proper citizens. And this is what we've seen looking at the examples that we saw with San Francisco, London, and New York with AIDS. And we did that in Paris, where in 2017 and 2018 we managed to reduce the number of cases of HIV/AIDS because we worked in a different way out there in the field with all the different players involved and basically with citizens too.
Merci, Anne.
Thank you very much for that, Anne. Thank you for showing us that this isn't a question of having the international sphere as a separate entity, a multinational sphere that exists apart from everyone else. When it comes down to it, it's a multitude of individual local situations. You talked about how these different levels of governance work together, and you also mentioned the huge importance of what we often call in the business the final mile. We will be going back to this question when we start talking about vaccines. As everyone knows, vaccines are a huge source of hope for humanity as a whole, also the field for intense competition, sometimes cooperation as well. And at the end of the day, vaccines are going to be central for the coming months for what we're doing and also our debates here at the Paris Peace Forum for the next 2 days. So you've got multinational, you've got multi-local, and you've got the way they work together. And the way that they work together is visible in other fields. Health, of course, which is at the top of the international agenda at the moment, also the environment. Paris is leading the way in a very clear way on environmental issues, promoting debate and action. And we also have the issue of relaunching the economies that this virus will have damaged significantly. We're likely to see longer-lasting damage in the West than in Asia, and that will likely see a shift of the center of gravity of these world governance bodies towards Asia. My second and final question for you, therefore, is, as we look forward, as we look at the major issues that will arise for our planet in the coming months, years and decades, and the way they've been changed by COVID, what is your opinion on Paris? How do you see Paris in the future, and what would its role be in these changes? What kind of networks, what kind of alliances are going to arise? What is your magic recipe for Paris here at the Paris Peace Forum for the coming years? Thank you for that question. It's true that we are at the crux of 4 different crises that are occurring at the same time, and this is completely novel in our history. We've got the health crisis, which is a worldwide health crisis, COVID-19, that's changed the way we live, the way we work, and changed our economy. We also have the world's economic crisis that is a direct result of the COVID-19 crisis, the health part of the crisis, that is yet to unfold but will be severe around the world. In world capitals, we depend a lot on international trade, on tourism, and the international networks. And in large cities around the world, in capitals such as New York and Paris, we are starting to see a lot of damage more damage maybe than in smaller cities because we are so dependent, and we fully recognize our dependence on globalization in that regard, but it means that now we are working with an economy that has been even more damaged than other areas may have been, other areas that work at a much more local scale. So we've got the health crisis, we've got the economic crisis, we've got the climate crisis as well, which also ties into the public health crisis, but there are other factors at play as well. I like to see the climate crisis as a way to rethink economies, jobs, and an opportunity to start looking at redirecting human activity and the economy towards areas that can be more useful going forward, useful for the planet and for people. So we've got the climate crisis, which is there. And these three crises lead to an underlying fourth one that may be more or less visible depending on the country, the crisis of democracy and citizens' trust in their leaders and in their institutions. In some cases, the fundamental values that tie our societies together are being thrown into question. This is what we're facing today. As you know, cities have been heavily affected by all four of these crises. However, we are a democratic space in which the relationship between leaders, elected officials, and people is made easier because we are geographically closer. Paris may be a huge city, very sprawling, but we know that the relationship between a mayor and the inhabitants of that mayor's city is the kind of relationship that is born through small day-to-day interactions. No matter the country, no matter the city, a mayor is there to look after people, their citizens, from birth until death, no matter what challenge they may be facing. For example, in France, cemeteries are handled by town hall as well. So you've got this link between a mayor and his or her citizens, and these links are these small day-to-day interactions, and these may be ways to strengthen, to rebuild that link of trust between citizens and their institutions. And it's been very damaged up until now. So we're in this situation where things look dire around the world. Martin Luther King said we need to learn to live together as brothers, or we will die apart as fools. And that just shows the interdependencies that I'm speaking of. We can't be fighting between a national level and a city level that are competing because they have different political aspirations. That's not something we want. You can't have economic players who are turning their backs on the climate crisis and the need to go towards what Jacques Attali calls the life economy, an economy that is more useful for people and more respectful of the planet. And we should no longer believe that we can win out despite others. We need an alliance. We need to better understand our interdependencies. Now, I'm not saying that we can't have diverging opinions, that we can't disagree, not at all. But given the severity of the crisis that we're facing today, we need to sort between what we need and what we want. And what we need to do is to turn the corner. We need an economy and a democratic system that is strengthened through the ties with the citizens. And climate change could be a driver, an amazing opportunity to relaunch our economy. That's what I think we have ahead of us, and cities have a great role to play in this. But to conclude, if this is to work, we need enough people on board. We need enough people to realize that we need to move forward together as brothers and not as fools. What we're seeing in the United States with Joe Biden's election is great news, in my opinion. Here we have someone who's going to move back towards multilateralism, where the Trump administration closed a lot of doors and disregarded, in some ways, the international aspect of politics and that interdependency that I mentioned. So that's the first piece of good news. And the second piece of good news is that this election is based on what the citizens of the big cities decided. In these large cities, you'll find diversity, you'll find more women, you'll find more different social stratas, and that is the power that implemented this change. So for the coming months and the coming years, I think that we need to really take climate change as an opportunity to change our economy. And we need to implement this change involving economic players and citizens, private citizens. To do this, we need to use all different levels of democracy, and cities are one of those levels. We're not a check and balance. We are a democratic space that can help rebuild trust, can rebuild social cohesion, and not so divisiveness. That's my optimistic message to you for the coming months and years. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mrs. Mayor. So lots of players, international and local players. That is exactly what the Paris Peace Forum is all about. Thank you very much for hosting us today and for these 3 days. Thank you for your support and your partnership. We've been working with the City of Paris since the very beginning, but there is another local authority that's been supporting us, that's been helping us since the very beginning. It's the Greater Paris Metropolis organization. And I would now like to give the floor to a message from the chairman of the Greater Paris Metropolis, Patrick Ollier. Dear Anne, thank you very much. Let's now hear from Patrick Ollier. Good afternoon, one and all. I'm delighted to be able to speak today because the Greater Paris Metropolis has been fully supporting the Paris Peace Forum initiative from the beginning. I would like to thank all of the speakers, first of all, and I would like to thank Pascal Lamy, one of the driving forces who, based on President Macron's decision, decided to create this. I'd also like to thank Trisha Shetty, who is the chairwoman of the Council of the Paris Peace Forum, and the Mayor of Paris, who's hosting us today, Anne Hidalgo. Thank you, everyone. The Greater Paris Metropolis is stepping up to the plate because life is changing. COVID is a pandemic that struck the entire world, and it's changing even more the way we go about our lives and what people think and do based on all sorts of problems: sustainable development, consumption, and social issues. And we need to adapt. Metropolises are where these changes happen because they are densely inhabited places. We've got 7 million people in Paris, with 135 towns, with Paris right at the center. And Paris is the kind of place where governance plays out, because cities are the places where we need to invent new ways to work together, work with citizens, and ways to be as useful as possible for these very densely inhabited areas. The Greater Paris Metropolis set targets, the first of which is to be resilient. This is important to me from a social standpoint, of course, but also from a fundamental resource management standpoint. Being resilient is one thing, but being sustainable is another, and climate issues are imperative for us. One of the targets for the Greatest Paris Metropolis is, of course, to be sustainable. We want to work to improve the conditions in which we address climate change, such as our initiatives against pollution with the creation of the low-emission zone, which has 5 million people living within it, or greening cities. These are great projects for the Greater Paris region and just examples of the many initiatives we have. So resilient, sustainable, but also inclusive and diverse. And in that regard, we are being very attentive to all the initiatives out there. We want to be determined and dynamic. Cities need to be where things are coordinated, but also need to be attractive in a way that attracts these new modes of governance and aims to win over as many people as possible to these modes of governance. It's also important for us to work on regional cohesion. In a region such as ours, such as Greater Paris, we realize that there are still huge disparities between areas, the east of Paris and the north, and then the west and the south. These differences need to be addressed by the metropolis, and you see these differences in all cities around the world. These are the targets that we've set ourselves. This Paris Peace Forum is an opportunity for us to open up dialogue on all of these issues, and I'm sure that the Greater Paris metropolis can take its full role in this Pascal Lamy-driven initiative. Thank you.
The COVID crisis